Next up, we have Josh Goldberg. That accent I added for reasons I don't understand myself. But dev tooling and static analysis is what we were going to talk about today. We were just arguing about if static analysis really conveys what it means, which is analyzing unexecuted code, but Josh thinks that's too much of a mouthful, but that is the topic here. Josh is an independent, full-time open source maintainer in the TypeScript ecosystem on projects that you might know, such as TypeScript ESLint. Yes, it's a great time to learn TypeScript, folks. Josh is also the author of the O'Reilly Learning TypeScript book, which I own and love, Microsoft MVP for developer technologies, and now that I've complimented him plenty, I'll also point out he is good at latte art. So take it away, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. That's a lie. I'm not good at latte art. I'm trying to be, and it hasn't happened yet. But hey, everyone, thank you for coming. I'm really excited to talk to you about static analysis. I don't know of a better word. Yeah. All my career, I was this. I was excited about linters and lint rules and getting more stuff on our code. And most of the time I was like this, and the people around me were like this. They did not like it, because this is the type of emotion that people typically associate with their linter and the squigglies in the editor. I don't like this. No more of, y'all know what this is. Fear, uncertainty, and doubts. That is what people associate with their linter, and I don't like that. Fear. Red editor squigglies, something is broken. Uncertainty, I don't know why it's angry at me, and I certainly haven't read the docs to find out. Doubt, I know my code works and the linter is just wrong, so I'm going to ignore it. I doubt it's useful. No more of that. We're not going to FUD it up anymore. Instead, we are going to approach our static analysis with love and understanding and appreciation. Does that sound good to everyone? Yes? Awesome, thank you. I think this stuff is really cool, and it'll make you a star developer. So let's dive in. Yay, static analysis. Why so squiggly? As we were discussing and screaming at each other earlier, static analysis is tooling that scrutinizes your code without running it, scrutinizes your unexecuted code, which is in contrast to dynamic analysis, who here tests their code. Y'all better be testing your code. Good. Now, there are three typical forms of static analysis you'll see in the wild. You might see formatters, who here uses prettier or dprint or FMT, awesome. And then you have the more powerful ones like TypeScript, yay, TypeScript. Yeah. And then in the middle you have linters, which are kind of sitting in between the two, and that's the area that I sit in. But we're going to cover all of them because it's a whole new world of awesome stuff. And each of these three tools gives you a lot of benefit. Pardon me. So let's start with formatters. Yes, the tab spacing thing. A formatter is a tool that looks at your code and reformats it without changing the logic. Without changing the logic. A formatter should never break your code. It just rewrites it or lets you know what's wrong. For example, this lovely little snippet here, this is actually valid JavaScript. Friend equals friend or me. Now, a formatter would look at this and think, oh, that's ugly. And depending on the settings you configured it with, might turn it into something like this. Friend equals friend or me. The same code, just with one less new line, a little bit less spacing. And yes, I prefer semicolons because I prefer non-ambiguous syntax, but that's a debate we can get into later. Now, if you want to get started with prettier, which is the most common JavaScript linter, not the only one, but a really good choice, npm install prettier -- save dev or whatever equivalent package manager, and npx prettier -- write. Now, for each of the 3 to 4 tools that I'm going to show, I will show you some kind of installation setup command. It's okay if you use a different one. For example, Dino is lovely and comes with a lot of these things built in, like Dino FMT, short for format. But these are just getting started suggestions. And I have all these things on my template TypeScript node package, just passed 300 stars this past weekend. I'm very excited about that. It's got formatters and linters and everything set up for you. Okay. Now, I've got a couple of cool things in that package that I want to cover before we skip over to more advanced stuff. For starters, every formatter, every common tool that we'll see today has a very common good VS Code extension and equivalent in other editors. You don't have to use VS Code to be a web dev. It just seems like everyone is these days. So Prettier has a really good extension you can use. I also recommend in your VS Code settings, which is something you can also check into your repo, set it as the default formatter and enable auto format on save. Because fun fact, if you get associating in your mind the idea that whenever you save, if your formatting is correct, if your syntax is valid, it gets formatted for you, you'll come to associate that if you hit the save shortcut and the file doesn't change on you, you've messed up your syntax. And then you'll get better at your syntax, and it feels really good every time you hit save and it formats for you. Also, that saves you a lot of time. Yay. And now I personally use tabs. It's a whole thing I don't want to get into, but .prettier.rc.json, just know you can format your prettier, your linter, your formatter, all these things if you don't like the way they work by default. Cool. We feeling good? We clean? We formatted? Good. All right. Let's talk about linters. Who here uses a linter? Yes. I'm just going to stare accusingly at anyone who didn't raise their hand. A linter is a tool that runs a set of discrete checks on your code. Each of those checks is commonly called a rule. Each of those rules, whenever it may optionally produce a complaint on a file or in a section of a file, each of those complaints may optionally include a suggestion for how to fix things. Each of these rules are discrete, meaning they don't touch each other. Rules don't care about what other rules are running. Each rule has its own purpose, its own little swim lane, and it just swims in that lane. Now, as an example, there's a rule called logical assignment operators that comes with ESLint, and very thematic to the idea of ECMAScript, whatever new version we're on. This thing will let you know, hey, I see you're doing x equals x or y. You can shorthand that to just x or equals y. That's a new JavaScript operator. That's a thing you can do now. And the lint rule would not only tell you you got it wrong, it would help you fix to the new thing, which I think is really awesome. It makes your code better and it teaches you at the same time. Yay, ESLint, woo! Now, ESLint getting started is fairly straightforward. You can write a config from scratch, or you can run through their little wizard at eslint/config to set up all the plugins and settings that you might want. There are a lot of different JavaScript project forms in the world, so it's nice to have a tool that'll set that all up for you. And I recommend personally, at the very least, extend from the built-in default ESLint recommended rules. ESLint ships with a set of rules you can enable, and this has been vetted and discussed and debated and changed over time to reflect the stuff that basically every repository probably wants. You might change some of these. For example, you could change a rule from its default error severity to a warning, but for the most part, these rules are good. And let's talk about warnings, actually. There are 3 optional severities you can configure a rule to: off or 0, warning or 1, error or 2. A warning will show up by default as a yellow squiggly. An error will show up as a red squiggly. ESLint will exit with a non-zero status code indicating fail to build if you have any errors, ignoring any warnings. Now, I personally don't like the idea of leaving things in code, so I often run ESLint with -- max warning 0, saying if you see any warnings, not just any errors, fail my build for me. And I typically fail pull requests in CI on ESLint, though I would never block a local build, a local dev server on lint failures. That's real annoying. And if you need, you can always disable a lint rule inline. And I want to lean into this and let it sink in. You can disable a lint rule in your config, per file, per line, per block. It is okay to disable a lint rule that doesn't make sense for you. If in most of your app you have the very common no console rule enabled, but in just one line you really want to meow, that's okay. Just disable the lint rule and move on with your life. Now, I also recommend -- report and use disable directives, which is an awesome little command line flag for ESLint, which says, if I previously added a lint disable, but then later changed my code such that it no longer would have failed that rule, then give me an ESLint complaint. That's nice. That's convenient. And fun fact also, ESLint has a -- fix command line option, which you can run, and it'll even fix up the unused disable directives. It'll clean them up for you. You can also trigger this in typical editors with like VS Code's command palette, fix all auto-fixable issues, and so on and so forth. So yay, good stuff. Now for ESLint and VS Code, recommended extension, there's a good one for ESLint. I also recommend fixing all ESLint rules on save, which is kind of nice, and also still formatting on save. But that brings up an interesting point. If ESLint can fix things on save, and Prettier can fix things on save, why do we use both? And the answer is don't! Don't do that. I want you all to repeat this with me. 3, 2, 1. Stop using ESLint for formatting. The question you all just asked through my mouth was wrong. ESLint is not a formatter. Rules like indent and semi, they're good in spirit. They are doing good things in theory, but in practice, a linter is not a good formatter. ESLint is not good at formatting. I'm not trying to debate you whether ESLint would be nice if it could do formatting. I'm saying it is not good at that job. It is an amazing tool written by excellent people that does so many things well, and formatting is not one of them. Because by design, by architecture, a formatter just reformats all in one pass without looking at logic, which makes it very fast and very good at formatting. But a linter has a bunch of discrete rules which might intersect with each other. The indent complaint might mess up your max line length rule, which then means you have to keep running ESLint over and over to apply formatting rules, which is a pain in the butt. It's not good. It's not how they work. So a linter is not a good thing to format with. So I highly recommend just use linter for logical issues, even stylistic ones if you want to be consistent in your code base, and use a separate formatter for your formatting. Okay? Thank you all for agreeing with me. And one last note. I'm on the team of TypeScript ESLint, which is the tooling that lets ESLint and Prettier support TypeScript. And I cannot tell you how many hours we have wasted trying to get those dang formatting rules to work. It's a complete waste of our time. It's so much more obnoxious and difficult than it should be. We have a pinned issue explaining that our indent rule is broken, and we're not going to fix it. And if anyone would like to fix it for us, feel free to dive into those thousands of lines of code. And no one has done that yet, for some reason. So, no more on that. Let's talk about TypeScript. Yay, TypeScript, woo! Okay, thanks. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, as has been said. That means that it has all the JavaScript syntax plus extra stuff. So we also sometimes call it JavaScript with types. Now, the reason why we like this is because JavaScript just describes your code's values. You can create a variable, and that's about it. You put stuff in it, but you can't say what is it supposed to be? What's supposed to be in there? What is its shape? And TypeScript allows you to describe those shapes, that intent behind the values, with a standardized syntax. And there is a community standard called JSDoc of how to do that in JavaScript comments. JSDoc is very verbose. It's not a ratified spec. There's no standard tooling to make sure your JSDoc is good, except for TypeScript, which I think is hilarious. So we like TypeScript. And TypeScript starts off with the programming language. That is one of the things TypeScript gives you. It is the idea of the language. But TypeScript also gives you a program. You can npm install TypeScript, and that gives you a type checker, which reads in your JavaScript and/or TypeScript source files and lets you know if you probably messed up something, if your values didn't align with your intent. TypeScript then also comes with a compiler. And I know that everyone treats these things differently in different areas of the industry, but the way I phrase this is a compiler is a transpiler plus a type checker in this context. Meaning it's a transpiler, it takes your TypeScript code, turns it into JavaScript, and it runs the type checker for you. And lastly, TypeScript also refers to the language service, which is the editor tooling you'd run in an editor, such as VS Code, that runs the compiler or type checker for you. Yay, TypeScript. And just to really hone in on why I'm so juiced about TypeScript and the rest of the JavaScript ecosystem is at the very least neutral, because suppose you had this function that just takes in an action, logs, calls action, logs. In the real world, it would be very difficult, especially if this break the internet function was in some other file. It would be very difficult to know, are we calling it right? Are we supposed to provide an action? What if we forget? Is the action the thing to log? Is it a string? Is the action maybe a function? Maybe we get it right, or maybe we change later and this ends up being incorrect in 5 years. Without TypeScript, there's nothing to let us know. But with TypeScript, at the very least, it can tell us, hey, you were supposed to call with an argument and you didn't pass one. And then TypeScript also has compiler options. The tsconfig file can specify, let's say, no implicit any, which says if you declare something and then doesn't have the ability for TypeScript to infer what it's supposed to be, or in other words, if it's implicitly the any type, the I don't know what this is, let me do whatever I want, TypeScript will yell at you. And then if you were to fix the any type, there we go, say by declaring it's a function, TypeScript can let you know if, oh, it's supposed to be a function, but you passed a string. So for those who haven't used TypeScript before, that's TypeScript. And if you're very interested, come to my workshop tomorrow, yay. Now I'll note no implicit any is in the family of strict flags, which is the TypeScript compiler option saying, punish me, daddy. Highly recommend using strict true. It's off by default for legacy compatibility reasons to provide people with a gentle onboarding, but trust me, you want to be punished. npm TypeScript, save dev. Similar to ESLint, there's a tsc --init, which will just start you off with a nice config, And then you can run TypeScript command line or TypeScript compiler on the command line. Now, I'm not going to go into good tsconfig options. I did, and then the talk was 3 minutes over, so I removed those slides. But just know that frameworks typically do this for you, and as long as they set strict to, you're good. Strict true. And similar to before, two things are not the same. A linter runs a set of discrete rules, each of which typically just looks at one file at a time and doesn't understand that there's anything else happening. Whereas a type checker builds a full understanding of your program. It reads everything. It knows everything about you. And it can use that knowledge to criticize you, like a bad relationship. But that means it's slower because it has to build up an understanding of all your stuff. So, couple tips on that. I actually added this to VS Code. The first thing, rule customizations. I always found it really confusing and annoying how ESLint gave red squigglies and TypeScript gave red squigglies. So especially if you had a rule that flagged a whole function or a whole file, you would have just a whole bunch of red squigglies and there was no way to know which was TypeScript or ESLint unless you got your mouse in the exact right location. So I recommend just change your ESLint rules to always visualize as the yellow squiggly instead of red. And then also, VS Code ships with TypeScript. You don't have to install it manually. But if you want to make sure that your project is using the same version of TypeScript as is installed in node modules, you can tell VS Code to use the node modules installed version. Node modules, TypeScript/lib. But OK. Final section, TypeScript ESLint, the thing that I work on. I mentioned that TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, but we're talking about JavaScript. It's not SeattleJS Conf. Yet, I hope. TypeScript ESLint provides two tools that allow ESLint to understand TypeScript syntax, because by default, JavaScript tools don't understand TypeScript. One tool is TypeScript ESLint Parser, which is a little plugin you can add to ESLint that allows it to read and understand TypeScript syntax, the new things that it otherwise wouldn't. And there's also an ESLint plugin which adds in a whole bunch of new rules that you can run that are generally better or specific to TypeScript code. So just going through that logically in order, you can tell ESLint in your ESLint config, use the TypeScript ESLint parser, then also load in all the TypeScript ESLint rules, and then extend from not just the ESLint general recommended rules, but also the TypeScript general recommended rules. Because there's a lot of stuff in TypeScript. And also, I just like sorting my configs alphabetically. I know that's really annoying to people, but that's how I think. That's how I organize. I also recommend, we have a stylistic preset. We recently released a new v6 of TypeScript ESLint, and we pulled out all the stylistic rules from recommended. Turns out if you tell developers to use your stylistic recommendations, they just stop using you. Who would have thought? That's bad. And it's just as an example of a TypeScript ESLint rule that's awesome. There's a TypeScript type assertion feature you can do that tells TypeScript, don't infer this as a, say, string, infer it as something more specific. And one of our rules will let you know, hey, you silly goose, you can just shorthand that to as const. Really nice, and it'll autofix for you, which is pretty sweet. But this is just a syntax rule. This doesn't expose the whole awesomeness of TypeScript, because TypeScript has APIs for type checking. TypeScript can build an understanding of your project. And previously, all of our lint rules were just looking at little syntax things, nitpicking you. Wouldn't it be awesome if rules could build themselves on type checking? I wish that were so, and it is, because we kind of unlock a whole new form of linting with TypeScript, type check linting, which, if you'll allow me to stand on a pedestal for a bit, is the value prop of TypeScript ESLint. And if you, say, are writing a linter that's built in Rust, hit us up, because I've yet to see any other linter do this, and I think it's really cool and really powerful. Because our rules can actually read TypeScript type API information and make much more informed decisions on your code as a result. For example, we have a rule, await thenable, which lets you know if you're awaiting something that isn't a thenable, that isn't an object with a .then, such as a promise. And it'll even autofix it for you to remove that awaits, which not just is better stylistically, but actually is leaner, faster code. It's fewer characters, and it removes the unnecessary await tick. And just as an example of how awesome this can be, I'm going to quickly show you this React code, fully knowing that not everyone here knows React or Preact, and that it's too much code to read quickly. But I'll just let you know that immediately the linter would have found an unnecessary await on the onClick. Because the onClick, let's see if I can laser, the onClick is a function that returns ignore it, we don't care, void. So that await is unnecessary. And one potential auto fix would be to change that to say, okay, it returns a promise, which makes the await reasonable. Or what if we realize, wait, we never actually pass in an async function, so the onClick actually should just remove the await, which means that the running state is unnecessary. This whole function wrapping it is unnecessary, which means the disabled state on the button is unnecessary because it's always false, which means we can get rid of like 1/3 of our code semi-automatically. Wow, yes! Linting! Woo! I couldn't figure out how to get this into the slides, but there's a tie-in somewhere about don't fear the linter being about death and us removing, I don't know. Anyway, so we have a bunch of linter plus type checker rules, the type checked rules. They don't get turned on for you by default in the recommended config because they require a little bit of configuration so that we know the TypeScript compiler options to run with. And because they are slower, they are asking TypeScript. TypeScript is one of the slower parts of your tool chain, typically, unfortunately, compared to all those fancy new Rust things. But if you enable parser options project true to just use the closest TS config, and then you can start using the type check rules. Yay, and those are new to V6. We just released V6 a few weeks ago, so hit us up with all your complaints. I'm sure you have them. Anyway, that's most of the information before we wrap up. So just some quick next steps. Make sure you're using a formatter, a linter, and a type checker, whether they are 3 separate tools or managed by something else or just built into your framework of choice. That's great, whatever. Make sure that you're using the recommended lint configs for not just your language or languages, but also whatever frameworks you're using, like Node and Next, whatever. Got a couple more of these. I have that template TypeScript Node package. I hate to self-promote, but it does have all the things I recommend doing. It's great. And the last one on this slide. There's an awesome ESLint repository, Dustin/awesome ESLint, which has this huge list of all the different frameworks and configs and plugins and whatever for ESLint that one could ever possibly want. So whether you're working on vtest or Jest or Node or Dino or whatever, it's got good lint rules for you. Awesome. A whole new world. So let's recap what we talked about. We talked about static analysis, how it's not something to be feared. These tools make sense, they're good, they're awesome, they're useful, they do things for you. We talked about formatting. We talked about linting. They're not the same. Stop using ESLint for formatting, for the love of God. We talked about TypeScript, and we talked about combining ESLint and TypeScript together. Yes. Cool. If you want, all these things are on the internet. I've had my name on the bottom of the slides. It's linked on the SeattleJS website. If you can't see it, it's Joshua K. Goldberg. I'm on Blue Sky, Mastodon. My server is Fosstodon. I'm on Twitter, GitHub, joshuakgoldberg.com. So that's good. As I mentioned, I'm on TypeScript ESLint.io. We are an independent open source project. We're not TypeScript. We're not ESLint. We're not Prettier. We're not with Microsoft or anyone. So our budget is small. So please support us. Please give it to our open collective. Or even better, file issues and or pull requests on our GitHub repo because we love contributors, always looking for new ones. And if you want help contributing, hit me up. I love helping people get started on GitHub in open source. I'm a person. Rachel gave a great introduction. Thank you very much. So if you want to talk to me about anything open source or TypeScript, I'd love to chat. I also wrote a book, as was mentioned, Learning TypeScript. Did not know you had it. Thank you for that. I stand by the book. I think it's a good way to learn TypeScript, as is the workshop I'm holding tomorrow. Yay, just show of hands. Who here is going to the workshop? 2 hands. Everyone else is a loser. Just kidding. You already know TypeScript. That's why you're not going. That's all from me. Thank you very much, everyone. This has been a pleasure.